Hey everybody, how's it going? I hope you're having a lovely day. In the last few videos that I've done on the New York City subway, I went over the fact that New York City is losing hundreds of millions of dollars as commuters jump the turnstiles and refuse to pay for the subway. New York City's solution to this was a standard New York City solution, which is to raise prices on the service that is so bad nobody wants to pay for it, and raise taxes on the people that are leaving. Standard way to deal with things, and a standard way to not take accountability or responsibility for anything that is actually wrong, but let's just take more of your money. It doesn't matter if the service sucks. It doesn't matter if it's never getting better. We're just going to take more of your money. And it looks like they have another solution here to try and deal with the people that are jumping the turnstiles. In addition to charging more money to the people who are not jumping the turnstiles, they would also like to get new fare gates that are harder to jump over. So the subway, again, is a turnstile, which pretty much anybody is going to be able to jump unless they've just had knee replacement surgery and are without their painkillers. So it looks like they are taking a different approach, and I thought it would be interesting to go over this article from the New York Times. It says, for years, the Metropolitan Transit Authority has mostly relied on the same approach to deter people from sneaking into the subways without paying. As passengers trickle in, police officers stand next to turnstiles and write tickets to those who jump them. Yet even after a dramatic increase in enforcement, the transit system lost $690 million to fare evasion last year, officials say. Now the MTA is grappling with an even more existential question that is not about how to crack down on fare evasion, but about whether criminal enforcement is the right approach at all. And to be clear, I don't think that criminal enforcement is the actual way to do this once you get to this point. Once the system is so crappy that even people that can genuinely afford to use it are like, you know what? I'm sick of you guys ripping me off. I'm not paying for this. Criminal enforcement is just not the way. A lot of the people that are dealing with this are people that, let's just be real, they're not going to show up to court. They're not going to pay the ticket. You're going to have a cop go to where they live, try to find out where they are, send them to jail over this. That's going to cost the city a lot of money. So to get that $2.75 that they've evaded by jumping the turnstile, the city is going to probably wind up spending $200 to $1,000 in resources to do so, not including the cost of the actual police officer that did the whole arresting thing once the person doesn't pay and has a warrant and so on and so forth. It's just, that's not an efficient way to go about it. I can understand from a law and order approach, like we're not going to let you not pay. I get it from that approach, but from a fiscal approach, again, that's when you think about people that are not paying the turnstiles, a lot of them are not going to show up to court. A lot of them are not going to pay the ticket, and they're just going to wind up with an open warrant on them. And the amount of money that the city is going to pay to deal with that is going to far outpace the $2.75 that they were trying to collect from the person who jumped the turnstile. A report unveiled by the authority last month proposed a number of new solutions, including funneling more resources onto buses where most fare evasion occurs, boosting a program that subsidizes the cost of public transit for low-income New Yorkers, posting more advertisements urging riders to pay, and adding new fare gates that are harder to climb. Again, posting an advertisement saying, "Will you please pay?" If you have a subway system that sucks and people feel like they are screwed, I told a story from a good friend of mine who stopped paying last year after 15 years of paying for the subway. An advertisement's not going to do it, man. If you turned what is supposed to be a 20-minute commute into a 2-hour-long commute because subway switches and systems and track work that should have been done 15 years ago never got done because the money that we've been giving you for the past 10 years keeps getting stolen by your fucked up ass system, you putting a little ad that says, hey, I know your commute's been 2 hours because we keep screwing everything up instead of 20 minutes. And I know we keep taking your money through taxes and fare for the past 10 or 20 fucking years, but we're never going to make the system work. But can you do us a favor? Can you keep paying? I don't think that's going to work. Call me crazy. I just don't think that's going to work. For the person that got stuck at Lorimer, Myrtle Wyckoff, Broadway Junction for the 900th fucking time, I think they're going to still jump a turnstile. Subsidizing the cost of public transit is something that kind of makes sense outside of the fact that you have a dwindling tax base and a budget of $100 billion a year with an existing deficit. So even with a budget of $100 billion, even with revenue close to $100 billion a year, the city is still struggling financially. I don't see how that works. Fare gates that are harder to climb? Again, imagine if they put that money into actually making the system not suck. Just imagine for a minute, instead of putting up these giant gates, what if the F train just worked? I know, I'm being crazy here. What if you could take the L train to Canarsie without ever having to take a shuttle bus again as long as you live? I'm not even talking about an expected scheduled shuttle bus. I mean the surprise shuttle bus that takes 2 or 3 hours to get there after some surprise bullshit failure on a transit system that has not been maintained properly since my dad had black hair. While some riders who do pay feel cheated by the idea of letting others off the hook, left-leaning politicians and advocates for poor New Yorkers have denounced aggressive policing because they say it unfairly targets the city's most vulnerable and, crucially, is not effective. Arrests and summonses for fare evasion have disproportionately fallen on Black and Latino New Yorkers, giving fuel to critics of the approach. During 2022, they accounted for 73% of the people arrested and given a summons for fare evasion among all incidents in which race and ethnicity were reported by police, according to analysis by Harold Stolfer, an economist at Columbia University who studies fare evasion. Ding, 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 ding. This is why actually trying to police fare evasion or any of these issues will not work. It's almost like I predicted this before this article came out. And I quote, let's go back to Lewis of just 2.5 weeks ago. See, this is not going to work, and I'll tell you why. The way that the ideology that persists in New York is that the people that are jumping the turnstiles are the disenfranchised. And if anything you do to make it harder for the disenfranchised to get on the transit system is going to be viewed as you're specifically targeting this particular group of disenfranchised people, this specific group of people who live below the poverty line, and that is evil, and that is bad, and that is horrible, and that is going to result in protests, it is going to result in aggravation, it is going to result in more tension, which is just going to make things worse for everybody. It's going to turn things into more of a pressure cooker that start arresting people that decide to jump the turnstile. And because this is just never something that goes well, it's never going to begin. Once you get a cop involved, once you have people who are breaking the law, who are trying to do things they're not supposed to, are going to run away, you're going to have an altercation. There's going to be an altercation where a police officer is a little bit too rough with somebody that jumps the turnstile, and then the protest will come. And then you'll have people saying, how dare you, that person was just trying to jump the turnstile because they needed to get a piece of bread or something. And after that happens, you will have protests and outrage and aggravation, and then you'll go back to what you were doing before. They're not going to have people policing this. That's not going to last. If they think that actually having people stand there and police jumping the turnstile is going to work, it's not. I guarantee that is not going to work. So they really do only have two solutions here, which is either A, make the entire transit system taxpayer funded in a city that has no money for it, B, make the transit system not suck, which is impossible to happen because New York City is run by morons, or C, put up these giant ass walls everywhere because that's what they're going to do. They're going to put up these giant-ass gates everywhere. They're going to spend tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money to put up giant gates in front of every fucking subway. I guarantee you this is exactly what they're going to do. Many American cities like New York struggle to rein in losses from fare evasion, in part because the cost of penalizing transit users can exceed the amount of money collected from fining them. 100% true. As a result, some places like San Francisco and Seattle have relaxed enforcement. You have people who genuinely cannot afford the cost of transit because they cannot afford the cost of living in New York City, said Molly Griffith, a lawyer with the Legal Aid Society, who said resources devoted to fare evasion should be redirected to address the root cause of the behavior. There's this sort of knee-jerk reaction to just rely on our policing our way out of a problem that the police can't solve, she said. Well, again, $100 billion budget has not solved poverty. Maybe they could have a $200 billion budget. But anyway. A spokesman for Mayor Eric Adams said the city has tried to help poor riders through the city's Fair Fares program, which subsidizes public transit fares for New Yorkers whose income falls below the federal poverty line, about $30,000 a year for a family of 4. Federal poverty line. If you make $40,000 per year with a family of 3, you're in poverty. Dare I say it, if you make $50,000 per year with a family of 2 in New York City, it could be argued that you're close to the poverty line. But he did not commit to the report's suggestion that the city should double the income threshold needed to qualify for fair fares, which, according to the study's authors, provides considerably less support than comparable transit subsidy programs in other cities. He also said that it was unacceptable for people to refuse to pay for rides, calling it a public safety concern for the city. I cannot hate this mayor more. Again, to be clear, there are many public safety concerns in New York. People not paying for the subway is not a public safety concern. That is a public funding concern. That is a concern of fairness. You could argue that this citizen is stealing services from a city whose transportation department has been stealing from the entire fucking city tax base for... I'm not going to get into that because that'll be a 2-hour video. But that, in my opinion, is not necessarily a public safety issue. And he's trying to say that to really rile people up over the wrong thing altogether. Again, public safety is an issue. Somebody not paying the fare for the subway is not a public safety issue. That's your transit system being a steaming pile of trash that you have refused to fix for 20 to 30 fucking years, that people are finally saying, if you're not going to fix, if it's going to continue to suck and get worse and worse and worse, then we're not paying. That is a separate issue. The MTA last year appointed a group of scholars, urban policy experts, and transit advocates to study the problem of fare evasion and come up with ideas to stop it. How about you stop wasting money on scholars and experts and transit advocates and start spending money on people to fix your fucking broken subway cars, transit switches, and tracks? Their recently released report offers the clearest picture of how and where the MTA is losing money and what tools the authority is experimenting with besides policing. The study found that most fare beating occurs on buses, where the system last year lost about $315 million in revenue. Yet efforts to rein in the problem have largely focused on subways, where the cost was $285 million according to the report. Commuter rail lines lost another $44 million, and the authority also lost $46 million in vehicle tolls on bridges and tunnels. The panel was convened because it's enormously important to the MTA to be able to collect fares, but it's equally important to the MTA to not be viewed as a vehicle to send more and more persons into the criminal justice process without the need to do so, said Roger Maldonado, who co-chaired the panel and is a former president of the New York City Bar Association. That's why it was so important to look at the underlying reasons for evasion and to come up with recommendations for solutions that would address that evasion without going into the criminal process. There are several people, in my opinion, who should go into the criminal process, and they're the people who run the MTA. About 700,000 bus riders do not pay the fare on average weekday. Skipping the fare on buses is as easy as stepping aboard without paying or dropping less than the full cost of a ride in the fare box. The authority counts fare evasion incidents on buses with automated fare counters and with sensors above doors that count the number of people aboard a bus. Despite that statistic, the study found that there was little enforcement on local buses, which make up the vast majority of the system's routes and stop them most frequently. The authors called on officials to deploy more fare checkers to local buses and to improve the technology used by bus fare checkers. Even if you improve the technology on the bus, let's be real here. The bus driver with the bus driver's salary, and let's be honest, the bus driver's complete lack of motivation to become a martial artist or practice that martial art on random people that come on the bus is not going to do anything about it. If I pay $1 instead of $2.75 into that bus, he is not going to tell me to get off. And if he tells me to get off and I don't get off, he is not making a problem about that because it is not worth it. It is not worth it for him. And it's not worth it for me. It is not worth it for him to make a fuss about that. He is going to let me on that bus. That is how that works. And dare I say it, kind of makes sense. Like, really, honestly, of all the employers in the world to risk getting yourself hurt for, is it worth getting yourself hurt for the MTA? Like, my employees are crazy. Don't count my employees. My employees are out of their minds. My employees actually followed a crazy person down the streets of New York City who was breaking every single one of the car windows with a stick and decided that he was going to steal the stick from the guy for sport because my manager is a nutcase. The right type of nutcase. The type of nutcase that I could hire and still have here working here 11 years later because he's a good dude. But still a nutcase. Most bus drivers are not going to have the smirk on their face that Steve had on his face after following his boss down the street as he was stalking a dude that was criminally breaking car windows. And that's a good thing. Most people are sane. You want your bus driver to be sane. You don't want your bus driver to be the type of person that wants to set off every single person who comes on the bus. Putting more technology on the bus to catch fare evasion is not going to do shit unless you have somebody on the bus that is going to enforce dealing with that fare evasion. And the moment that happens, it's disproportionate. And when it's disproportionate, there's going to be a protest. When there's a protest, there's going to be a riot. When there's a riot, they'll just go back to the way the shit was before. On subways, most riders evade the fare by walking through an open emergency exit gate or by jumping over, ducking under, or squeezing in together at turnstiles. To measure incidents, the MTA deploys about 10 people every quarter to spend about 600 hours at randomly selected stations where they manually count how many people skip the fare and compare it to the system's fare collection totals. Which again, you have a statistic. The statistic is not going to help you here because you have painted yourself into a corner. The authority is also experimenting with camera technology, which has revealed more than 50% of subway fare evasion happens at its gates. The panel recommended replacing the system's turnstiles with what it described as fare gates of the future. Tall, motorized plexiglass doors that are harder to sneak around. The study noted that variations of the technology have been installed in Amsterdam, Paris, New Jersey, and San Francisco. You can't say that the gate is disproportionately targeting people. And the panel urged the police to give warnings to first-time offenders in hopes of compelling them to pay, rather than immediately penalizing them with a $100 summons. Those who receive a summons and pay should get back $50 in credit to ride the system, while repeat offenders and people who commit more serious crimes in the system should face more serious punishment, the authors wrote. Some recommendations lack key details. For instance, there is no price tag nor a specific timeline for the turnstile project. Officials have not specified how much they have spent fighting fare evasion, but at a city council meeting in December, Richard Davey, the president of the New York City Transit, the MTA division that oversees the city's subway and buses, said the authority paid about $1 million per month for 200 private guards to monitor subway turnstiles. The guards have little power to enforce the law or the MTA's rules, which has prompted questions about whether the cost of hiring them was justified. And true, again, if you don't have power to enforce the law, you're literally paying the guards to watch people jump over the turnstiles. That is a waste of money. And dare I say it, those 200 private guards could have been maybe 100 union workers that would be actually fixing the fucking switches, the train tracks, everything else. Give people an experience they actually kind of feel a little bit guilty for not paying for. Maybe make the experience so good that your fellow New Yorkers will actually guilt the people themselves that don't pay. It'll become a little bit of a cultural thing that people will feel like paying because they're receiving value. So you provide them value, and then in return, they will provide you value. And if they refuse to provide you that value in return, their neighbors will shame them because they actually feel like they're getting a good deal. See, that's called creating a sustainable society, which is something that you really seem to fucking fail at and enjoy failing at for a long period of time, which is why people like me don't live there anymore. The goal in flooding New York City's subway with police officers last year wasn't just to stop fare beaters, but also to make the system feel safer after a sequence of high-profile crimes scared many riders out of using public transit. The safety of the system has been a source of anxiety during the pandemic after a series of shocking crimes on platforms and trains. Last month, a woman was shoved against the speeding subway train on her way to work during what prosecutors called a completely unprovoked attack. To be clear, if something like that happens, I don't think that that person is going to go into the subway and just say, you know what? I'm not going to pay the $275 for the chance to get murdered. I think that person is going to be traumatized out of using the train system for the next 5 years. I don't think it's a fare evasion problem for her. Dorothy Scholes, a retired captain with Metro North Police Department and emeritus professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, echoed the mayor's complaints about a sense of disorderly behavior in the subway and said that a boost in fare evasion enforcement was necessary to make riders feel safe. You're supposed to pay at enter, Mr. Scholes says. It's not a free system. Yes, again, as I said earlier in the video, there are 3 choices here. You could make the system free, but again, even with $100 billion in revenue, the city is behind. That's not going to happen. You could make the system better so that people actually feel like they are getting a service that's worth $2.75, where they feel bad about not paying, where they culturally enforce that their neighbors, hey man, what are you doing? Yeah, why are they actually fixing this stuff now? Why don't you pay for it kind of thing? Which again, good luck with that. Or C, spend millions of taxpayer dollars putting up gates. They're going to put up the gates. They're not going to make the system any better. And here's the thing. The best part of it, it's not going to fix any of the problem. All you're going to do is plug a small hole right now, whereas the larger problem here, the issue of less and less people using a system that is less financially viable as time goes on, that you're not fixing anytime soon. That's for today, and as always, I hope you learned something.